Welcome back to the Album Awards, a quarterly show hosted by me, John from ARTV, as I look back at the best and worst music of Q4 2020. Thank God that year is behind us. Can we all just take a second and breathe a total sigh of relief? Much better. I hope you're doing well, neighbors, and if not, then I hope things get better soon. You guys know I've stepped back from doing a lot of the dedicated album reviews I used to do, mainly because it just wasn't enjoyable to me after a decade of doing it. I needed to shake things up, but I wanted to say thank you for all of the love that you've given the Album Awards. This allows me to cover a lot of albums in rapid fire succession. If you need a refresher of the rules or how this works in general, then pause your screen right now to see, and remember, all of the albums that I'm covering here for Q4 have to have been released between October 1st and January 1st to qualify. Please consider liking this video. A like truly does go a long way. Subscribe for the love of music, because a lot of y'all out there watching aren't even subscribed, so I see you. Without further ado, let the Q4 2020 Album Awards finally commence. The 90s Fever Dream Award goes to Fake It Flowers by BEABADOOBEE. The archenemy plaguing the Young Stars' debut LP has less to do with their actual talent, which is obvious, and more to do with the way this album is paced, which is kind of agonizing. I feel like we're constantly going from sun-soaked rock jams to the dark corners of her bedroom in an attempt to appeal to older fans who loved her kind of homegrown bedroom pop appeal. It's not so much that I mind the slow jams, it's just that she keeps spraying water right after the guitar-dominated fire gets started. Most of the singles dropped before the album spoiled us into thinking that the music would rotate on that kind of axis, but outside of the grungy, deep-cut Charlie Brown that explodes with tenacity, I don't think there's really a ton to get stoked about here. The girl's got potential, but Fake It Flowers curbed its own enthusiasm. Punk rockers Pup take home the Year in a Nutshell award for their EP This Place Sucks Ass. What do you get when you mix seething anger with a bag of leftover goodies from one of punk's most provocative modern groups? Easy answer, even for those of you who suck at math and still have nightmares about failing calculus like I do. It's a Molotov cocktail shooting flames in expected and unexpected ways. There's a cover of a Granddaddy song that sounds super tight with Pup's hazy punk makeover, a brand new song Nothing Changes that sounds like the soundtrack to 2020's Funeral, plus Anaphylaxis, a really funny leftover from Morbid Stuff that's backed with loud guitars and hilarious lyrics that I found myself singing along to quite often throughout the year. Honesty time, you guys know I'm all about honesty here. The other songs I didn't mention are totally fine, but they're definitely less exciting than the material they forked over in spades on their 3 full-length albums. This is an EP for fuck's sake though. I wasn't expecting the world, yet we got some really killer songs. Give it a spin if you happen to miss out, a really strong 3.5 out of 5. Ashton Irwin of 5 Seconds of Summer fame gets the Out of Nowhere award for SUPERBLOOM. Yeah, wow, this one kinda came out of nowhere. 5 Seconds of Summer are a massively popular band, and as you may know, all of their members have sung on their records in the past, but for whatever reason, I didn't see their drummer Ashton Irwin as being the first one to put out a solo album. SUPERBLOOM was highly requested by my viewers, and I checked it out just to calm y'all down, but color me fucking surprised because this thing's actually pretty damn good. I mean, not like mind-blowing good, not most of the time at least, but the fact that he used his personal struggles with body dysmorphia and depression as cornerstones to build on, with a soaring 90s rock atmosphere blazing the trail? I mean, when it works, it fucking works! It could've used some more finesse lyrically, as a lot of the songs do get quite repetitive, but the mere fact that he's willing to take a chance and make something not so mainstream friendly is hella respectable. The You Get What You Pay For award goes to AC/DC and their latest album, Power Up. The Rolling Stones made famous the saying, you can't always get what you want. But AC/DC barged through the door and said, fuck that, you can, and we'll make the same album 50 times over, and no one's even gonna bat an eye, because rock and roll, baby! Tons of fans were fishing for a new album, so lo and behold, there's Power Up on the line. But unlike the perilous waters of the ocean where you're not so sure what you'll catch, think of this more like fishing on your Animal Crossing island. There's plenty of fish in the sea, but there's only about 1 out of 3 variants you're gonna find 95% of the time. Are you catching my drift yet? If not, then get better at fishing and hold this 2.5 on your way out. The Masked Intruder Award goes to the network for Money Money 2020 Part 2. Green Day let us down pretty hard last year. Shit happens, you might disagree with that statement, but as a die-hard fan, my favorite band, I felt like their album really missed the mark, and I had very little, if any, motivation at all to go back to it. Fortunately for us, the mysterious Masks Up side project The Network resurfaced with a new album that definitely doesn't feature members of Green Day and other friends. It's definitely not that, and you definitely won't hear Billy Joe, Mike, and Trey taking on lead vocal duties under an alter ego. The Network was offline for so long, I had honestly kind of swept the side gig under the rug when it comes to all things Green Day, but it turns out Where in the World the Forgotten Lie are actually right under our noses. Money Money 2020 Part 2 We Told You So is here, y'all! Line off some fireworks because there's actually a lot of good shit to talk about. Bouncing around the network's airwaves is a lot like hitting shuffle despite the interconnectivity between the tracks. You change the station and you'll hear a different member singing, a different ideology politically speaking, whatever it might be, it all circles back to cutting loose and having fun within the misery. And one of the greatest things about Part 2 is that it's even harder to classify than its 2003 predecessor. Tight bass grooves keep my head bopping, especially when they steal the spotlight. The post-punky spirit of Van Gogh, aka, well, you know who, sounds cathartic way more often than not, even when the lyrics go off the rails meta, and I'm digging more and more of this tightrope act of one song being a little faster with a driving guitar, and the next tapping heavily into the 80s new wave synth punk movement despite the very apparent modern commentary. They get their shots in and certainly miss a few amidst the sea of 25 ADHD fueled cuts, but the network clearly weren't fucking around when it came to banging out some quality tunes, and honestly, this put my mind at ease when I hear members of Green Day doing something killer after a lackluster showing that a lot of people dunked on. The Cutting Room Floor Award goes to CMFT, the solo album by Slipknot's Corey Taylor. This wasn't nearly the train wreck I expected it to be after CMFT Must Be Stopped. That song clocked my worst tracks of 2020 list easily. I stand by the cringe indeed being way too strong, but after listening through the album several times over the course of a few months, is it bad that I almost want the Slipknot frontman's solo record to be worse? What a weird thing to say, right? He wants a bad album. You're huffing and puffing to yourself, and no, that ain't it at all. I'm saying if it were egregiously bad, like, at least I wouldn't struggle to remember almost anything about CMFT. Yet here we are, between hard rock and a soft place, watching Corey Taylor compose music that's sure to be bumping in every trailer park wrestling ring in America for the next decade. Silverfish was a nice little highlight that reminded me of, say, Stone Sour meets Alice in Chains. There's a great little build-up to cap off what is easily the best song on the album, but that's part of the problem right there. You're not gonna find too many songs that demand to be played on repeat. Once you've filtered out the pure eye-roll ability Samantha's Gone, the inconsequential ballad Home, and the aforementioned CMFT Must Be Stopped, which pretty much says it all right there in the title, you're left with a bag of forget-me-nots begging for you to care, but I had my foot halfway out the door the entire time, just waiting for the moment I could slip away from the party. The legend himself, Paul McCartney, gets the Do-It-Yourself Award for McCartney 3. It's always intimidating to review a living icon, especially one that avoided the later years' cringe and continued releasing beloved solo albums, including this one, the 40 years later McCartney 3. My heart couldn't quite piece this one together at first, and while I still feel this is a very jagged effort, it's probably better that way as Sir Paul's Lockdown record is stronger when you examine the individual conduits rather than the entire circuit board. Much of the mindset relating to the McCartney trilogy of albums is DIY. Do it and play it yourself. Macca will leave you feeling slightly frustrated when certain tracks don't elevate or pay off to the degree you were expecting, but then he'll drop an anchor on your head, an undeniable timeless tune that makes you feel the life within you bursting at the seam. If I can offer some personal advice, listen to this record with good headphones. I dropped the ball and heard this for the first time in my car, and I really think that put a rift between me and the music, but with headphones, you're gonna properly hear the urgency of Women and Wives as Paul lays down some ghostly piano, or maybe the kiss of Venus will grip you tighter as his tender voice rolls alongside the acoustic guitar. Paul McCartney has nothing left to prove. He finished that bottle of wine off decades ago. Despite its inconsistencies and a bad habit of running in circles with reprises that don't really demand your attention, McCartney 3 ages gracefully with repeat listens, even if Paul's voice is clearly struggling a bit as he knocks on 80's door. It's a strong 3.5 out of 5 for me. The Jaw Dropper Award goes to Post-Human Survival Horror by Bring Me the Horizon. My jaw still hasn't left the floor, and my neck's been begging me to stop hitting play for months now, but the end just isn't in sight. Bring Me the Horizon went fucking insane on this EP, and I'm salivating like Pavlov's dog for more. Bring Me sit atop the throne of whatever rock revival we're currently experiencing, blending nu metal styles of yesteryear with aggression, emotion, and full throttle intensity that should properly smash your face in as you crank the volume knob to 11. You really can't put a price tag on this kind of perfection. There's so many Thunderbolt moments of light, from the expertly timed pacing, jagged whiplash riffs, cutthroat production, plus the commendable vocal range from Ollie that hits both screams and sincerity. This is a landmark achievement from a well-established band. The Lock and Roll Award goes to Strange Days by the Struts. Lock and roll was the new rock and roll in 2020. Strange days were indeed aplenty, and the Struts yelled Carpe Diem from their COVID bunker and recorded a 10-song album in just 10 days. Impressive ambition or failed experimentation? Well, there's more good than bad, but let's wade a little bit deeper into that conversation. The Struts absolutely harnessed the spirit of glam rock, and I'm not gonna fight anyone that says Luke Spiller owes his entire persona to the late great Freddie Mercury, because that's true. His large amounts of sass served up alongside gravity-defying stadium riffs helped them catch on with both old and young crowds, but now that album 3 is here, I'm just not sure if they're ever gonna make a truly great record that makes our heads roll. There's something to be said for the Struts' optimism though. It's contagious on the inflammatory all dressed up that roars with a foot-stomping chorus, and the frown upside down are another hit of showmanship, which brilliantly reminds you of how well they work with other musicians, this time the Strokes' Albert Hammond Jr. Working with other people is something else I wanted to speak on, since there's a solid amount of big-name rock collaborations on Strange Days, including the British icon Robbie Williams on that stadium-ready title track. Apparently, they originally wanted to have one guest featured on every song, but I'm kinda glad that didn't work out, since the ones that are here feel more special, and you can really hear the creative spirit between the bandmates in the recordings, even if Adam Slack deserved way more of the spotlight. Don't expect to be mind-blown, but do expect to walk away feeling enthusiastic as you toss a handful of tracks into your back pocket. Despite my criticisms, I'm still rooting hard for the Struts. They're great guys with a great spirit about them, and I hope they prove me wrong and blow it out of the water with whatever they choose to record on album 4 whenever that time comes. The Solo Dolo Mojo Award goes to Man on the Moon 3 by Kid Cudi. Man on the Moon lived as a legendary two-part series for almost an entire decade. But after years of career missteps, fumbled projects, and steps towards redemption, Kid Cudi gloriously reconnects with his past collaborators and alter egos all at once for Man on the Moon 3, The Chosen. Now that it's a trilogy, the more the merrier, I say, when it comes to this twisted psychedelic hip-hop production that Man on the Moon's brand is famous for. Cudi sounds both vulnerable, scarred, and confident as he takes life in stride for a surreal out-of-body experience. It's great to see his talents radiating not just for a song or two or even 3, but for an entire album that sees him bending the modern era in his favor. Cudi is still instantly recognizable with his beloved humming and the washed-out trippy beat selections, but it's also pretty obvious that this is a modern record. Thankfully, his personality that felt so striking on those original LPs isn't lost here. Rather, he changes lanes slightly to incorporate things like bass-shaking hi-hats or ad-libs, which definitely can tweak the enjoyment here or there as they feel less than necessary, but if it opens the door to new fans, then I don't see a problem with this at all. Rapping plays way larger of a role than I would have expected, with Cudi really carrying the torch on highlights like Dive or even Tequila Shots, a gorgeous auditory explosion that opens part 3 on an extremely high note. Solo Dolo 3 is the perfect slice of mental exploration at the halfway point of the album, and I was really impressed at how well Cudi keeps his bearings in the second half. It doesn't just pad the track list for the sake of streaming, there's actual gems buried back there. From the tender beauty of Lovin' Me featuring the amazing Phoebe Bridgers to the twinkling trap dream Heaven on Earth, this is easily the best Kid Cudi album we've gotten in a long time. Man on the Moon 3 is worthy of steady rotation, and I'm giving this a strong 4 out of 5. YUNGBLUD's sophomore album Weird gets the I'm not a fan but the kids like it award. YUNGBLUD attracts a younger generation, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm getting older, I was never cool to begin with, so for me to sit on my high horse and judge something or really any artist just because of how they look, how their image portrays themselves to the press, that would be dumb of me, so let's not go down that road. Objectively, I can see why teenagers like the guy. He's got a lot of spunk, even if the majority of his ideas feel very done before. See, the lack of originality he exudes is kinda made up for when he hits his stride, and his victory laps generally show up in the form of undeniably boppy hooks a la Strawberry Lipstick, which I think is a really fun song, as well as his rockier side of the persona that suits Dom a whole lot better than the whole trend-hopping shit. One thing I just can't get past, even if I find most of the collection to be decent if not forgettable, how the fuck are we not talking about the bass line to Cotton Candy being a straight up clone of Tame Impala's The Less I Know The Better? Like, okay, you copied the Wikipedia article, you changed a few words, and now you've turned it in as your homework? Maybe it's a coincidence, but I can't not hear it, and it totally ruins the song for me. The more ballad-esque moments feel sincere enough. The anthem should get the would-be future Warped Tour kids fist-pumping for justice, and the so bad it couldn't even make the Machine Gun Kelly album acting like that? Well, that one can rot in a broken time machine to be pecked at by vultures, but it's the worst piece of an honestly okay puzzle. Light 3 out of 5. Wonder by Shawn Mendes gets the I Wonder Why This Exists award. I genuinely thought Shawn Mendes was on a path to redemption, given the quality of at least some of the songs on his 2018 self-titled effort, but hey, I guess I was wrong, because here's Wonder, an album that practically begs to be mercy-killed by the end of its 40-minute run. Mendes sounds like he's flat out of ideas, clueless as to what direction to steer his career, and here we are tapping our watches, not so patiently waiting for him to figure it the fuck out! I can't quite put a finger on it, but there's something so off-putting about Wonder that mainly has to do with his inability to convince me that he has his heart fully in the game. This is a relatively cohesive project, although it's often to the point of delusion. You're just left sitting there, watching him toss a copy of The Greatest Showman on top of a pile of puke. Tryhard is probably the #1 word I'd use to describe his efforts. I'm very aware that he's attempting to elevate and raise the emotional stakes and hit these big beats with big musical swells. Shawn Mendes is quite literally the definition of something borrowed. He rarely sounds natural, and while some of the ideas are commendable, we're not in the business of giving out participation trophies here at ARTV. He owes his star power to the sounds of other musicians much more talented than him, so forgiving his passable vocal showings and the album cornerstones like the title track, or even the riveting guitar performance Look Up at the Stars, you can just chalk this one up as a radio-formatted loss that sees another waste of potential for Shawn. The Smashing Pumpkins are going home with the Glory Days Are Over award for Seer. Billy Corgan, you ambitious goon. You're so desperate to be adored again by the masses, yet you lack the ability to get out of your own ego to actually take your band to those 90s heights. You see, I've stuck with the Smashing Pumpkins through the years, not as a full-time devotee, but rather as a curious adventurer willing to try on the many new sounds that William wanted to implement. It seems like the Pumpkins have re-solidified their core lineup for the first time since Melancholy, so hats off for stability, but let's hope this is just some sort of bizarre hit-or-miss stepping stone on the way to some more fully fleshed out ideas, because this synth-pop record sure does sound a lot like Billy Corgan's solo Wet Dream gone wild. See, when I say that out loud, it probably comes across way meaner than I want it to. Seer is album 11. No one's delusional enough to think they were topping the classics with this one. Well, other than Billy himself, who did refer to this as a modern Pumpkins classic. There's some genuinely dope song structures baked into The Terrifying Witch, and the title track is also brilliant. I love how ominous the synths sound, as they kind of reflect off of Billy and the backing female vocals. But you guessed it, those were both pre-release tracks, and not to discount the impact of maybe saving Save Your Tears or The Color of Love. The other two are the best on the album, and much of this 20-song affair is just Billy worshipping his synthesizer, while a lot of other really talented musicians like Jimmy Chamberlin steal his thunder by generally being way better than Billy, since he can't seem to break free of his own recycled ideas, even if he is trying to make them sound more modern. Why the hell is Sear an hour and 12 minutes long? Does Billy Corgan think longer Smashing Pumpkins albums are just automatically classics? Everything starts to fade to black as you zone out by the 15th time you hear the exact same synth tone set to the same backing vocals hitting the same beats. The Trojan horse move may have worked for a few diamonds in the rough, but make no mistake, this is most certainly the rough. The Nail in the Coffin award goes to Fuck Art by the Dirty Nile. Jagged, curb-stomping riffs with a middle finger fuck you attitude will have you feeling like you're caught in a tornado somewhere between Yellowcard and Pup as the Canadian punks The Dirty Nile clean house on their latest album, Fuck Art. The loud, rowdy group come across just as tattered as ever with splintering thoughts on everyday life and occasional humorous musings on less-than-great life events, but something's lost in translation when it comes to making a fully memorable album. First listen through, you're soaring high on the wings of eagles. Second time through, you start to notice the recycled song structures, and once you've fully invested yourself in playing through it a handful of times, you might just realize that, Fuck Art might just be a bit more bark than bite. I do like the songs that take the time to fully flesh out the verses before diving headfirst into a flaming hook. The first two songs on the album, Doom Boy and Blunt Force Concussion, show off a knack for blending metallic riffs with smoothed out choruses, but from there on out, I'm not having a bad time, I'm just easily distracted. Good songs happen, but not great ones, with the exception of To the Guy Who Stole My Bike that actually dares to be different and thoughtful as it unfolds into a more progressive side of the Dirty Nile. And now we close tonight's album awards with a special throwback presentation from my patrons. Thanks to Brandon Barenfeld, Seth Kopish, Andrew Weiss, and Dayton Hamilton, we'll be going back in time to review 4 throwback albums from a variety of unique bands. To find out how you can add an album to my schedule in the future, visit the top link down below to support my channels on patreon.com/ARTV. May, the Everglow, released in 2005. May might be a name you've never heard before, but you can thank my patron Brandon if you end up loving it, because this indie rock band's second album, The Everglow, was his request. The Everglow very much sounds dated in many ways, but even though I didn't grow up with this record in the 2000s or have it in my life before the past year, I'm still pretty impressed at how well they nailed the driving pop rock sound of, say, Vanessa Carlton meets Reliant K with pianos aplenty and the more intimate buzz an indie darling might generate. They absolutely light up the chemistry throughout, with some of my top favorites being the roaring Cover Me, the nostalgic anthem Someone Else's Arms, and the really peaceful moment The Ocean. That's definitely going to remind you of a few other acts, but I'm going to leave that to the imagination if you end up checking this one out for yourself. Honestly, the biggest thing that won me over was the earnest momentum that May seemed to have in spades. There's obvious filler strewn about, mistakes we knew we were making, suspension, even the opening and closing dialogue isn't a mandatory listen, but they've got the heart to make you soldier on to continue finding positive aspects among the slightly negative. I am glad that I checked this thing out, and I'm gonna give The Everglow a strong 4. The Who, Who's Next, released in 1971. How do you even approach an album as highly revered as this? Well, thanks to my patron Seth, we're gonna figure it out together, because this is the first time I've ever reviewed an album by The Who on ARTV, and it's their 1971 classic, Who's Next? For years, pretty much my entire time on YouTube, I've called myself an outsider to the Who fandom, loving a small handful of the classic tunes, but not really knowing their discography in terms of full-length albums at all outside of Tommy. I am stoked that I got to spend some time with Who's Next, as I think I've finally fully realized the entire magnitude of this release. The Who originally wanted this to be another rock opera concept album like Tommy, but they ended up scrapping those plans even though they kept a lot of the songs. I don't think you need me to come on here and say that Baba O'Reilly or Behind Blue Eyes are amazing songs. We're not gonna play that game because those have been discussed to death alongside the also classic Won't Get Fooled Again, even though that's probably my favorite song by The Who. Instead, I'm gonna quickly talk about some of the album's other virtues, including its deep cuts. This is a rugged, immaculately produced record that still sounds so full of life 50 years later, and yes, 2021 marks 50 years of Who's Next, meaning it's almost exactly 20 years older than me. What a very strange thought. Keith Moon is a drum god. He died so young, but the talent this man possessed as a drummer, it often leaves me speechless. This was the first time I ever truly felt like I had a laser focus set right to his kit, but the fills, the rhythms, the beastly stick smashing, the man's a legendary drummer, and I honestly believe this album wouldn't be nearly as great without his contribution. The outro portion of The Song Is Over is a major testament to his talents, and overall, it's one of the best songs on Who's Next. From the more gentle nature of Love Ain't For Keeping with its sticky refrain and slick acoustics, to the more freedom-bound Going Mobile, this album always manages to keep things fresh without overstaying its welcome. I don't see how I could give this album anything less than a perfect score, so Who fans, I hope you're happy for multiple reasons. The Weakerthans reunion tour released in 2007. Thanks to my longtime patron Andrew, it's time to review a band I didn't know by name before the review was requested, but it's one that I realized I did know a few songs from due to their peak in popularity during the 2000s. The Weakerthans are a Canadian indie rock band from Winnipeg, which also happens to be the hometown of the patron that requested this. I know it means a lot to him, so let's take a look at their final album reunion tour released back in 2007. First impressions of my first full album experience with the Weakerthans? I was bored. Nothing was really jumping out as ultra important, and I felt like I'd been handed a version of the Shins that was built for the PS2 but got a lackluster port to the Game Boy Advance. Thankfully, that feeling went away the closer I listened, and people, when I tell you that lyrics can make or break a project, it's 100% true, because reading along with this and connecting the lyrical dots, that's what makes Reunion Tour come alive. Indie rock is a diverse subgenre, and the Weakerthans use that to their advantage on a wonderfully ordinary album stuffed full of life and tributes to local heroes. Their frontman frequently visits other people's points of view, framing songs like an outsider passing through, or in some cases, the perspective shifts to that of a ghost, a friend, or even a family pet. Simplicity can be magnificent when explained in a compelling way, and I'm not ashamed to admit that some of these songs really rattled my emotions when I started feeling the words lift from the screen to my heart. You feel empathy for the individuals under the microscope, whether that be literally as the group puts a unique spin on the sad story of David Reimer with Hymn of the Medical Oddity, or when they strike up a slow march to sadness on the heartbreak where Virtue the Cat explains her departure. I genuinely did not expect to be so moved by a song written from a cat's eyes, but it really makes you think about the way our pets see us, or even beyond that, struggling to remember the things we love most about people in our lives as we lose our way over time. Eclectic but low-key instrumentation can range from an acoustic guitar to the pitter-patter of drums to even some orchestration, but the band wears these sounds like a badge of honor. There's certainly some less enthralling cuts, especially in the back half, considering the elegy track feels like I'd have to know the person to get it, and the closer was definitely a bit undercooked, but there's comfort in these walls that makes this worth exploring. Start with the tracks I already praised, especially if you're looking for an emotional roller coaster, along with the back-to-back gems Sun in an Empty Room and Night Windows, both of which were named after paintings. I would have had a very different opinion on Reunion Tour if I hadn't taken the time to seek out the lyrics, but since I did do that, I'm giving the Weakerthans a strong 4. King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard NONAGON Infinity, released in 2016. At long last, the day is here. No more waiting, no more saying their huge discography terrifies me, no more excuses. John from ARTV meets King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard after years of anticipation, and it comes in the form of a throwback review of what most would call the Australian band's best album, NONAGON Infinity. My longtime viewer and Patreon supporter Dayton requested this album as a way to ease me into King Gizzard, and buddy, you picked one hell of a battering ram because this album fucking rules! If you're not familiar with this record, I'd call it a psych rock magnum opus that brilliantly and seamlessly loops from top to bottom. Songs flow into each other, lyrics from the opening song scatter like ashes and continuously pop back up in other tracks. The pacing is kinda like being on the best roller coaster ride of your life, but instead of the 90-second thrill ride you'd expect it to be and then it's over, the good times never let up. Hitting play is like stepping through a rift in time. It's a mighty whirlwind that rides on the back of elaborate guitar rhythms, masterful drums with some pretty insane sounding fills, and some of the best production you're gonna find on a modern rock album, period. There is smoking gun firing 9 bullets all at once, yet through the powers of rock, or maybe something closer to Tenet, they all end up taking very unique journeys even though they all clearly came from the same arsenal. I love it, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself since there are a few very minor things I'm not always on board with, but still, it's a strong 4.5 easily. The epic 7-minute joyride Evil Death Roll probably lands as my favorite track overall, but fuck if I don't love the earwormy Big Fig Wasp, Gamma Knife, and Mr. Beat too. That brings to a close the Q4 2020 Album Awards. Thank you guys so much for watching and for your patience in me getting this out. These are very hard videos to film, so if you could drop a like on the video, share it out with a friend, and leave a comment down below with any of your thoughts on any of the albums I covered. If you want to see Q3's roundup, then tap right here, tap here for another recent video, or support me on Patreon by clicking the top link down below. Thanks again to everybody who watched and supported, and I'll be back soon with more on ARTV.